The following podcast is brought to you by CDKOffers.com. Use offer code BrokenSilicon for 25% off Windows codes and Die Shrink for 3% off all other codes. Links in the description, and I will say more later. But for now, let's get to the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a computer, gaming, and hardware podcast. I'm your host, Tom, and I will let my distinguished guest introduce himself.
Hello there. I'm Jon Peddie from Jon Peddie Research. We are specialists, analysts, and researchers in computer graphics. We chase the pixel, so anything that influences a pixel on almost any platform, we have opinions about.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good way to put it, right? If it influences a pixel, you're interested in it.
Yeah. So we can't tell you anything about networks, and we can't tell you anything about operating systems and anything else like that. But if there's a pixel, we can tell you about it.
So the way I want to start this podcast is just a little bit about you, if you don't mind. Like, where are you from? What did you study? What got you into this? You can do a Cliff Notes version if you want, but I am curious where you come from.
Well, there was a meteorite landing from Zonar, and when the shell cracked up, that's what my wife says anyway. Started my career as an engineer, so I like to say I used to have an honest job. I was an engineer, and
what type of engineering?
Electronics, electrical engineering.
Ah, okay, mechanical. Go on.
And got the bug and became a entrepreneur and started a few companies and sold them and started them and sold them and so forth. And in 1981, believe it or not, I was bought out of the company I had most recently started and decided that would be a perfect time to retire. And my goal was to retire and write science fiction books.
Okay.
And that lasted almost a month. And the thing that
I've
killed
heard many stories of that, by the way. People retire to write books and they realize in a month, man, I gotta.
I wanted to do it, but people kept calling me and asking me to help them. And I said to my wife, I said, I think I'm in the consulting business. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of grew from there. And then being in the consulting business, we found that writing reports was useful. So we got into the publishing business. So we've been doing publishing and consulting for 30-some years. Again, all focused on the pixel. I watched a lot of companies come and go and watched a lot of them grow.
Yeah, and I've got quite a few questions about that. I mean, that's actually one of my first ones I was going to bring up. I mean, if you look back at the history, just of the silicon industry in general, especially if you go deep down the rabbit hole, I'm no offense, but I am a lot younger than you, but I can read the past and it's like, wow, there used to be dozens and dozens of chip manufacturers, even just in graphics cards for gaming. And now we're down to, relative to the past, almost none, frankly. Do you think this could change in the other direction soon? I mean, we have new standards like RISC-V and, ARM's trying to get into several markets. And, I think, and also to just kind of talk about where I'm coming from, just a stagnation at some silicon nodes. Do you think there's a real chance for new companies to pop up and compete with the limited players that are left?
Short answer is no.
Mm-hmm. So you think it's going to stay like a 3 or 5?
Yeah, we count a total of 11 if you include IP suppliers. There's 2 platforms basically that GPUs get put on. I assume you're talking about GPUs. Mm-hmm. And that is that it's the PC and it's mobile devices. So in the mobile devices, you have a few semiconductor manufacturers and a few IP providers. In the PC side, you have 3 primary semiconductor suppliers. And they provide a couple of different types of GPUs. AMD and Intel provide integrated GPUs. AMD and Nvidia provide discrete GPUs. And pretty soon, Intel will be introducing a discrete GPU as well. To get into the discrete GPU market today, would be a horrendous expense, and only a
It would
company
be.
only a company like Intel could take that on. And mind you, that Intel is coming to it with experience. Also, they're not just suddenly waking up and saying, "Oh, what's this GPU thing?" They've been building GPUs for quite some time. But to assemble a team, these teams are huge. There's thousands of people involved in designing and building a GPU, and to find those thousands of people as a startup, not that a startup could even afford 1,000 people. Would just
Not
be,
without like a serious backer like Samsung or some mega company that really want, and they would have to have to really be sure they're ready to commit to 20 years, because they certainly wouldn't compete with the big players. Well, maybe not even in the first decade, right?
Yep, that's right. And in fact, saying Samsung is kind of an interesting thing, because Samsung has done that in the mobile space. They are going to be coming out with a GPU in the mobile space pretty soon.
Well, and there's also a couple other players. There's Xingjia, which is really more for the Chinese defense. I don't know if you've seen them, but I find it interesting that they are comparing a lot of their newer GPUs to Pascal graphics cards. I don't think that can be a complete coincidence, do you?
Well, they can compare it to Pascal. I don't think it does compare, but they.
Well, I mean, they had like a 600 millimeter squared card with HBM that they said could kind of compete with the GTX 1080. So it's fair to point out that it takes a lot of extra brute force to come even close to Nvidia's like 2-gen old mid-range offering.
That's right. But for the market they're targeting, which is, as you mentioned, the military, they don't need to have cutting edge, bleeding edge, if you will, technology. In fact, just the opposite. You want something that's proven and reliable, because it's got to run for 10 to 20 years.
Now, what do you think, though, about ARM entering into, any market, really? I mean, there's been a bunch of rumors they're working on a decent push into graphics. They made graphics before, of course, but that they might go into more powerful graphics soon. And so where do you see ARM playing in terms of that, but then also pushing into anything else they're not already in, like x86 and all of that?
Mm-hmm. Well, working my way backwards on the two questions,
sure.
I don't see them pursuing an x86 license. Not that I don't even think they could get one. I don't think Intel is willing to do that. And AMD is not permitted to do it under their licensing agreement with Intel. So ARM is not in a position to field a x86 processor.
Well, they've been trying with emulation recently, right, too. It hasn't gone anywhere near where I've seen people hype up its potential, though.
Oh, well, no. Take a step back from that. If you talk about emulation, that's a different subject, because there's a very, very successful emulation. And in fact, Qualcomm is the leader of that, which is using an ARM processor. Qualcomm is building chips that are being put into PCs by Lenovo, HP, Acer, and other. And these are ARM-based.
They haven't really taken hold, though, really, have they? In like laptops? I mean, I've seen them, right? I've seen them, these ARM laptops at Best Buy. But in terms of actually competing through emulation with like Intel or AMD in laptops with x86 emulation, it doesn't really seem to be there yet. Anytime they almost seem to be able to match some level of performance, it seems like Intel or AMD, or really both, come out with something that just really clobbers their ability to compete in like an x86 emulated laptop. Would you agree with that, though?
More or less, I would. Yeah, the Qualcomm-based systems that Lenovo and HP and so forth have brought out have been targeted at competing with Chromebooks. And of course, now AMD, and before that Intel, had a very strong position in Chrome. Not that Chrome was that big a market to begin with, but Chrome did well in the educational market, and that looked attractive. We've tested, in fact, I have one here, the Qualcomm-based unit. We have a Lenovo, a Hingy one. I can't remember what they call it now.
Yoga?
But, Yoga, yeah. And we've tested that for almost 2 years. And as far as we can tell, and we're pretty damn brutal on machines here, is it's bulletproof. It works. Every app on it works. All the little old funky DOS apps that I have, old tools and things like that, they all ran. It's a fine machine, and it has the added benefit of that built-in modem, radio modem, so that you've always got a connection if you have an account. And so that means you don't have to go to Starbucks to get Wi-Fi. You can be anywhere there's 4G or 3G radio.
And do you think ARM will be able to push some kind of high performance graphics solution out anytime in the near future? I've heard multiple rumors that ARM's trying to get some kind of desktop graphics card, or maybe not desktop, but at least powerful enough to be used in laptops or something. I don't know if you've heard anything about that, or do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I have heard about that. It's a speculation. There's nothing coming out of ARM. There have been people who said, "Well, why couldn't you just scale up the Mali GPU and enter that market?"
Right.
And ARM's position, their public position, when asked something like that, is, well, it's not for us to do that. We provide the IP. Our customers can do that if they so choose to. None of their customers have chosen to do that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Like they don't plan to make it as their own initiative to scale it up that high, but they've said if our customers want to try, we're not going to stop them.
Yeah, and they don't hold the position of being the most powerful GPU in the mobile space. Imagination Technology has that position, and they've got direct competition from VeriSilicon and others. So they're doing what they have to do to hold the position that they have. I don't think they can expand, and they're also getting lateral competition from RISC-V and so forth. And RISC-V has 2 GPUs now being offered for it, and so Qualcomm's got its hands full just holding on to what it's got.
Okay.
I said Qualcomm. I'm sorry, I meant ARM.
Yeah. So that's those companies I've just mentioned. How do you see? I don't know. I'm trying to think of how to ask this question, because I'm going to start going into Radeon versus Nvidia now. Like, how do you see Nvidia's market position in terms of gaming desktops? I know it's a very open-ended question, but
well, Nvidia, of course, has been the leader, big leader. 70 to 80% market share, depending upon when and how you count. And they have a loyal following. They have a huge development team, and they are literally state-of-the-art, leading edge. And so it's going to be difficult to topple them. In fact, it's going to be impossible to topple them. But what AMD can do and is doing, we measure this, is that AMD has been nibbling away at Nvidia. And so they picked up a market share percentage point every quarter for the last 3 quarters, and they may do it again this first quarter of 2020. First quarter of 2020 is going to be a very peculiar quarter because of the virus and everything.
Yeah.
And how it's disrupted the supply chain.
Well, from what I've been told, AMD is really going to, again, assuming they can support the supply chain for such an attack, I'm told they really, and I mean really in quarter 4, want to go for broke with multiple consoles using their chips and a massive RDNA 2.0 launch on desktop. So hopefully, and I say that just because I like to see a more balanced competitive market. AMD can do that. But the question I have here comes from a supporter, which anyone can submit reader mails if you support me on Patreon. Sam97 goes, with the biggest part of NVIDIA's revenue coming from their gaming GPUs and AMD slowly regaining market share in the space at a steady rate, at what point do you think NVIDIA will have trouble competing? Like, I think what he's basically asking is, like you're saying, AMD's taking a percentage here and there pretty consistently the past year or so. At what percentage market share in desktop/laptop do you think NVIDIA starts getting into trouble?
Well, if I were to make that prediction, I'd get into trouble. So I'm going to have to kind of skirt around it. But
sure.
I can tell you this, that when a company has ridiculously dominant market share, as NVIDIA has had in GPUs and as Intel has had in CPUs, all you can do is lose. It's almost impossible to increase market share once you have so much of it. So AMD has a lot of things going for them. They have a very, very loyal fan base. They have people like you, for example, who want to root for the underdog and like you say, get a balanced playing field.
My laptop has NVIDIA. Let's be clear. I just buy what's the best product. But yes, I do. It's easier to root for AMD. I'll just say that.
Well, I think a lot of people like AMD, and in fact, I think Jensen Huang likes AMD too. But AMD will, as long as they don't, screw up, if they continue to offer really good products and to be competitively priced as they have been, then they can't help but take some market share from Nvidia. And now, having said that, let me also say that if you ever underestimate Nvidia, you will make a huge mistake. It's one of the most nimble companies I have ever seen, ever. They make decisions in a day when something pops up, and then they follow through on them. They've got enormous resources, and so there's almost nothing that Nvidia can't do. And so if they got confronted with something where, let's say, AMD had an amazing new product that was just such a killer product that people were going to buy them as fast as AMD could build them, Nvidia would have a counter product in 6 months or less. I mean, that's how nimble they are. But I don't
it
see
kind of sounds like that's happening. I mean, there's been all these rumors about what node Nvidia may use or not use. I mean, right now, the current rumor is that they're, as expected, going to use a mix of nodes, highest performance products on TSMC 7 nanometer. And there's a rumor going around right now, which is hard to confirm because Nvidia really doesn't allow a lot of leaks to get out of their company, I gotta say. But the current rumor going around is that it's going to be basically the newest version of Samsung's 10 nanometer for most of the, I guess you might say, high end to mid range and below segments, and they're going to market it. Samsung is marketing it as 8 nanometer. It seems like they made a decision at some point to just go with that to make sure they can have a constant supply. And even if they can't beat RDNA 2.0 on, let's say, N7 plus, not plus, but P, as uniformly as they might have been able to in the past, that they're going to launch a very, very aggressive Ampere product this fall. And I guess, what do you think about let me make this into a question. So let's say AMD does get some crazy RDNA 2.0 product out this fall. It's a complete product launch, top to bottom, all new cards. Let's say it is 50% more efficient than before across the board. Do you think if NVIDIA's top card couldn't beat AMD's top card, NVIDIA would be in real trouble or not?
I can't imagine a world where NVIDIA couldn't beat AMD's top card.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
it's happened before, though. I mean, there's been multiple times.
20 years ago.
No. The 5870 was out for 6 months, an undisputed leader before NVIDIA could launch the GTX 480. Yeah. And the 7970, undisputed leader for a couple months. The 680 basically tied it, but it slowly pulled ahead. Then they launched the Titan, and I would even argue the 4870 was basically better than anything NVIDIA had, even though it technically didn't have the performance crown. I mean, that's something, that wasn't that long ago. That wasn't even a decade ago that AMD had product launches like the 290X as well. That was a brief win, but it was a win. So you don't think that could possibly happen again this year? I don't think it's as rare as people think. I just think it's been, look, AMD almost went out of business recently, so they have problems. Yes.
It's not that so much. It's a matter of resource. And one of the ways to look at it is to think about AMD is right now approaching to a $6 billion company. 5 and something. And NVIDIA is approaching a $9 billion company. NVIDIA is focused 100% on GPUs. AMD splits their resources in
They're
half.
Also competing with Intel, which is just a juggernaut.
Right. So let's assume that they do a 50-50 split. That means that a $6 billion company has $3 billion of resources for GPU as opposed to NVIDIA's $8 or $9 billion. So there's a 2-to-1, almost 3-to-1 advantage right there, and that matters. That means that there's 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, depending on how you want to count, engineers, people worrying about these kind of problems that we're discussing right now. Mass counts, and to AMD's great credit, and I've credited them over the years about this, they squeeze the most out of silicon as any company I've ever known. And I've known them since ATI days. They've always had that concept of getting every last ounce out of the silicon. But the other thing that AMD has had to do, and they've done it effectively, I think, is they've had to pick and choose their fights. And
especially recently.
One fight that they chose not to go into, and I think it was the correct decision, was to engage in the high end, A, because it's very, very expensive to do it, and B, because it's a smaller market. Now, granted, the margins are higher and the ASPs are higher, but it is still smaller by almost an order of magnitude. So they've concentrated on the mid-range and done a pretty good job there. And so it remains to be seen whether the RDNA 2 is going to come out and be a genuine high-end product that will compete head-on with Ampere or not. And I don't have any crystal ball on that. I can't give you any insight on that. But I will give you hints, and that is to look at the stuff that is being said about the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X and what they're announcing. And mind you, that's
they seem really impressive.
Yeah, and mind you, it's an integrated graphics GPU. It's not a standalone discrete GPU. So it's got some bottlenecks in how well it can perform. But nonetheless, it is coming out with state-of-the-art features. Variable shading, ray tracing, etc. And those are features that NVIDIA had first and introduced first and gave them the lead. But now here comes AMD with renewed resource, I should add. They've been making money. They've been making a lot of money. And so they can make more investments. They can take a little bit more risk. And so
they have the benefit of like all main gaming devices. Well, not all, but I mean, the consoles are having developers have to program for your architecture for all new games that come out, no matter what their PC market share is a major asset that they were very shrewd to take, I think, in the PS4, Xbox One generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, let me ask you this, though. So you seem skeptical they can with a big RDNA, although it sounds like you're saying there are hints, there's something going on. How damaging to NVIDIA's reputation do you think it would be if AMD did take the crown, even for, let's say, a few months this year?
Well, both companies, AMD and NVIDIA, have their super loyal fans. It's a religious, political,
they annoy me.
Thing. Well, I find them amusing, but that fan base, no matter what either company does, the fan base is going to support them and argue about why what they've done is great and why the other company is cheating.
You don't think it's a vocal minority, though, that is like, and don't get me wrong, I know that the fanboys are out there, but I've always found, and let me give you an example. I remember before the PS4, Xbox One generation, there were all of these people like, oh, no matter how good the Xbox One or the PS4 is, they're going to keep the majority of their market share from last gen. And that's not really how it panned out. One was perceived and launched much more effectively. And people just, like me snapping my fingers. I think people are much less loyal than people think. I think that's changing a little, though. I do think loyalty is becoming a bigger thing as you use the same software over and over. And that's what's changing how loyal people are, making them more stuck to using the same software they're used to. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know. I think a lot of people buy NVIDIA just because, let's face it, it's getting better. But my first desktop had an NVIDIA graphics card because I didn't know AMD graphics cards existed. Like, I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Where's the marketing? And you Google NVIDIA, and I'm talking back in like 2009 or something. You Google graphics cards, what pops up? NVIDIA's website. They have this cool, slick specs sheet for each graphics card. They have bar graphs that show the performance. So you're like, oh, I can afford this much. I want that one. And the bar graphs only show their graphics cards. So
that's marketing.
Right.
And that's a resource sink, and that's like I say, the difference in resources between the two companies has been that way. So,
but I didn't mean to cut you off, though. I think you're.
Well, no, you're not cut off. Maybe we've got a kind of nice rambling conversation here. The only point I wanted to make, kind of a counterpoint to something you said, is that there's a difference in philosophy and attitude between console gamers and PC gamers. And the big difference is that the console gamers may talk about the hardware, but it isn't the hardware itself that influences their buying decision. Console gamers buy the game, and then the hardware to run it. And so the console gamers are more driven by the game itself. That's one of the reasons Nintendo has remained to be so ridiculously successful, is because they've got a library of games that people just love to death, and they're going to play those games forever. And so when a company, Microsoft or Sony for this case, gets a really good game, an exclusive game like, say, Halo on the Xbox, that is going to drive the sales for Microsoft. And as long as Microsoft's latest, greatest console brings a little oomph to the party to make Halo run well, and there's a new Halo, that's what's going to drive it. Now, the PC side is different, because the PC games generally don't have a bias or an advantage of one PC GPU over the other. They're pretty much evened out. DirectX takes care of that for you. Thank you very much. And so it almost doesn't matter which graphics board you put in, unless you want a special feature such as Nvidia is offered with ray tracing. Now, that's going to be neutralized by the end of this year when AMD introduces their ray tracing stuff. And so then it'll be the next great thing, whatever that happens to turn out to be. But anyway, the point being is that in PC land, buyers are influenced by marketing, as you're a victim of, and by what they think the board's qualities are. And again, I guess you could probably track that back to marketing, whereas in the console side, they're influenced by the
You're
game.
being careful to say, thinks or perceives the values are.
Well, we're all consumers, right? We go out and buy a car, or we buy clothes, or whatever the hell it is we buy. We don't really know what's going on there. We buy a car. Who knows what's inside a car? There's a steering wheel. Okay, I like it. I'll buy it. You go out and buy clothes. Is this a good knit? Is this going to last a year, 5 years? You don't really know. So you buy it on emotion, and you buy it on what your friends are telling you.
I don't know. I think people are becoming more shrewd as we grow up more and more used to using the internet. I agree. Marketing definitely has a major effect on people's purchasing decisions. But and this is kind of a little off subject. This is just kind of my perspective. I think there is a marketing bubble right now, and I suspect people think marketing's influencing people less than a lot of people seem to think it does. Like, I'm not so sure. I'm just noticing, like, AMD is taking this market share now, and I'm seeing more and more intelligent reasons, right, in Newegg reviews for why people are buying it. I think people are becoming smarter. I think the new generation of people, as they become adults, is used to being inundated with marketing since they were little. And instead of being brainwashed, they're kind of becoming numb to it. I mean, we're getting a little off subject, but I don't know. I actually am not so sure that people are going to be blown away by marketing as easily as they used to be. I don't know. What do you think about that idea?
I have two thoughts on that.
I haven't really quantified what I think, really. So it's kind of all just a concept to talk about. But
there's a thing called guerrilla marketing. You may know about it. And if marketing is successful, you don't realize you're being marketed to. Mm-hmm. That's the trick. So if you think,
but I think people know when they are these days. Go on.
Well,
sorry.
But maybe they do and maybe they don't. But the flip side of it, and this is my wishful thinking, which might play into your philosophy, is I would really, really like to see people in all categories be more discriminatory and to be more challenging of the presumptions that are given to them, that rather than just taking it at face value and saying, oh, there's a red one, that must be good, is that, ask a question. Why is red good?
It's my favorite color, so that's my answer.
Okay, well.
As you can probably tell by looking behind me at all the red objects in my house.
We're all biased in one way or another. But it's called critical thinking, and that's what I was trying to get to. Is that it used to be a subject taught in school, doesn't seem to be anymore. And the idea was to teach people to not just accept at face value what they're told, but rather to try and find the reasoning behind the presumptions that are given.
I don't know. I think there's a lot of critical thinking going on, but I don't know that I can speak too much about how much of it's from school or not. That's certainly an entirely different discussion. But I think that I just see people questioning things a lot more now. I don't know, right?
That's good. That's good.
Like my friends, for instance, the Nvidia ray tracing thing. I think there were a lot of people that thought, oh, here comes Nvidia with this marketing thing, even though almost no game is going to support ray tracing for years. And even if they do, it's going to run like absolute crap on these early cards. And what ended up happening is that's what a lot of reviewers said. There was a immense amount of pushback that this ray tracing doesn't even really work. And you saw AMD take market share. So I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure people are as easily swindled as I think and maybe people used to be, but I'm just not seeing it. Then again, I'm not giving any hard numbers. So it's kind of just a little bit, it's not like I'm saying, oh, because of this, some percentage. I can't give you any investable advice for it, but I don't know. I'm not sure people are going to fall for it, whether it comes to the consoles, graphics cards so much. I think if one product's stronger, I think they might just buy it, even though, yes, there are certainly plenty of people that are just going to buy an Nvidia forever until they die, no matter how good or bad it is.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So let me say this then. I've got a point here where we've already been talking about it. So let me jump around my script. So what do you think about the new console announcements? We don't need to talk about it too long. And frankly, there's still a lot more to learn.
Well, I'm impressed, quite frankly. We did a deep dive review of them, of both machines, and the feature set is incredible. It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting to me, and I don't know if it is to you or your audience, but
it is to me.
Yeah. Okay, well, the chip itself, the design itself, which comes from AMD for both parts, is basically exactly the same. And the interesting part is the path that Microsoft took and the tweaks that they made versus the path that Sony took and their tweaks. So Microsoft pushed the clock in one sense, or Sony rather pushed the clock in one sense, whereas Microsoft pushed shaders in another sense. And so they have an imbalance there. It's a differentiation. And if you do a paper analysis and do a simple calculation and say, well, this one's going to get so many T-flops and other one's going to get that many T-flops, and there'll be a differentiable. Yeah. And so one has a higher number than the other, but that won't allow you to predict the actual performance.
That's what I've been telling people too, because what I did a big video a couple of days ago where exhaustive research reaching out to as many developers as I could get a hold of. And they're saying the numbers that you're seeing on these pieces of paper is not telling you any real story here. They're performing entirely differently than I think many people expect them to. And that's for me is making this very exciting.
Yeah, but it comes back, and if you're talking to developers, I mean that really is the magic right there. That's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. In that you can take two developers, they can be developing almost identical same games, but it's just they did their artwork better, they found a better way to manage the geometry, they do their memory calls differently, and they're almost hardware neutral.
That's exactly what I'm told, which is hilarious. Is I think people get fixated on like, well, for instance, as an example, the Xbox CPU is clocked, I think like 3-4% faster. And it's like, yeah, but because of the way Sony's organized their co-processors, supposedly the PlayStation CPU doesn't need to be used for as many tasks. Right. And then and I could go on and on and on and list. And that's what I'm being told is that they perform pretty much the same, although obviously the PlayStation's smaller and it should be cheaper to manufacture.
Yeah, probably not by much. But anyway, it comes all the way back to the thing I mentioned earlier, which is it's the games are going to be the decider, not the hardware. I mean, yeah, there are going to be a certain group of people, again, the fans, who will buy an Xbox just because they believe in Xbox and hope that some games come along to
and they have been berating me in the comments section. So I guess one thing I will bring up too about the launch that I think people are missing is one thing I found really interesting is that the Xbox, and a lot of people seem to be skating over this, Microsoft specifically talked about how the Xbox Series X can run 4 instances of Xbox One streaming 1080p streams if they use this APU in a cloud server, and they can of course give it more RAM in a server cluster for this APU. I think a lot of people are missing the fact that it has more teraflops and it's organized with an interesting memory controller. I think this is clearly a cloud streaming APU Microsoft wants to use in addition to putting it in a console, and that would explain some of the organization of its architecture. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I did, and I agree with that. I think that Microsoft and Sony's doing the same thing, by the way. Both companies are seeing the web as being the repository of games, not your system. and that you're going to be able to take your console and literally go anywhere. I don't think it's going to be too long before consoles get radios in them, and literally let you sit in the back of the car with one and play it whilst you're going somewhere.
What do you mean by that? I don't know what you mean. They get radios in them, work in the back.
Well, the idea being that right now we have the portability of Wi-Fi, and so you could take your console.
Oh, I see what you're. Right. Oh, you're saying you can just beam it to your phone or something.
Yeah, I think that 5G. I mean, not tomorrow, and probably not for 5 years, but 5G is going to become so pervasive and so ridiculously fast that you're going to have some way of strapping a smartphone or something onto your machine so that you can get access to that network and all the stuff that's up in the cloud.
Yeah, that I'm glad you said that, because for now, right, I expected Google Stadia to work really well. I mean, I know PlayStation, I don't play streaming games. I like low latency, so it's always bugged me that, that very slight millisecond that you can feel like in the delay between pressing a button and streaming the game. But I know PlayStation Now supposedly works. No one says it's great, but it works. And I expected Stadia to be way better, but it seems like it works worse. I don't know if you've looked into that at all. It seems like it works worse.
It depends on where you are. That's the problem. It's how close you are to the best server, and where we are, and with the service that we have here, we can't see any difference. I mean, our experience with GeForce Now and with Stadia and so forth is it's just like having a machine right next to you. So now we ran some tests. We ran the tests in India, in Germany, England, and Taiwan or Japan. I can't remember right now, but anyway, somewhere in Asia. And as you might expect, the folks in India said, "This is terrible," and they just didn't have the bandwidth, right? So it just wasn't delivering an enjoyable experience to them.
So you think it is coming, though, right? Because what I'm saying too is I'm skeptical that this can become a standard anytime soon. But you seem to think it can in 5 years.
Well, do you use Netflix?
I do, but I don't need to play anything while I'm watching Netflix. It streams, and it doesn't matter how long the delay is. The delay could be 10 seconds. As long as it starts it within 10 seconds of me pressing play, I couldn't care less.
How do you feel about lip sync?
It's all right. I gotta be honest. It's interesting how some TVs and audio setups have major lip syncing problems just inherently. But I mean, it works, right?
Yeah, well, it does, and that's my point. Is so it works, and it works. Maybe we can say good enough. So therefore, you're not buying DVDs anymore. And if you had a cable box, maybe you let it go, or if you had a satellite box, maybe you let that go.
They make me take the cable box for a deal, but I mean, I don't even have the thing plugged in. I just want the internet.
Well, but the point being is that you have an alternate and perhaps superior delivery system now, i.e., Netflix, as an example. And I think it's logical and reasonable to assume that gaming will follow that path. Is that
So here's where I push back, if you don't mind. The reason I push back is that I feel like graphics are getting close to the uncanny valley. We're not to photorealism yet, but I could see like the pro versions of the consoles in a few years getting us almost there. Once you get to that level of graphics, we're going to keep die shrinking, using less energy. And it should make it cheaper to make consoles that can output the graphics at the uncanny valley level. And once you're there, it's just going to be cheaper to make these boxes. They're not that expensive, right? A console is $300. And if the latency is at all perceivably better, and it is for me, and literally it always will be perceivably, I think it will always be perceivably better with how much cheaper it's just going to get to make these graphics. I'm not so sure it's ever going to be worth it to beam it in, because it's like, how much are you really saving? Is it that hard to pay $200 for a console 10 years from now? I don't know that it is. I mean, I guess I don't know what you would say to that opinion.
Well, I think you're just skewed slightly in what you're looking at, and that is that the console, I think, is tremendous value. I totally agree with you there. The value for money is amazing. But think of the console as not being a closed environment, but rather being a terminal. And the advantage of the cloud is not the hardware that you're playing with. The advantage of the cloud is the library. is that you're gonna have a huge choice of games that you can rent for a little while or buy, depending upon what your preference is, more so than you could or would with hard media or even downloading something. I mean, I remember we still have some DVD games here in the closet, believe it or not. But anyway, I remember when we used to buy those damn DVD games, and there was always a question: well, do I really want this game? Geez, if I could only try it before I buy it. And what if I don't like it? Well, now you can do that. You can snack on a game for not too much money and say, well, hey, this is pretty cool. I am going to go with this. And now you have the opportunity, the potential opportunity. It's not there yet, but the potential opportunity to just, go into a library and say, I'll have one of these, one of these, one of these, one of these. Geez, I spent $10. I didn't spend $150 on DVDs, right? I just spent $10.
Well, so no, but I agree with that. And I've been very outspoken that I think Stadia is one of the early places it can really, really make a big splash is, let's say, I'm on YouTube watching some video, an ad pops up and it's an ad for the new Assassin's Creed. And instead of saying buy now, it says try now. And I just click a button and it's just, I snap my fingers and it's, even if it's just 720p, I can try it for free. And it's like last year's game. They don't care. They're not going to make any money. I was never going to buy it, but they can stream it for free and put ads, and Assassin's Creed is hard because it's usually in historical time periods, but plenty of games take place in cities. And in the background, you could have real timely ad buys popping up while you're playing the game, like, on billboards in New York in a video game. Like that type of stuff, I think that is coming. And I think that will allow you to try things for much less money than any time before. But I guess I am skeptical it could ever beat what the PS5, Xbox Series X, or PC gaming can bring, because the latency is always going to be there. And once we get to graphics that people think are good enough, which frankly, I think we're almost there right now, I don't know. That's only going to make consoles cheaper, right? When people stop being able to tell the difference between new graphics, which is already becoming a debate, I think they just become cheaper to make. And when they become cheaper to make, I'm not sure how much cheaper it is to beam it in if a device becomes so cheaply for a low latency experience. I don't know that. I definitely think streaming is somewhere to go, but I think there's an argument for people saying we don't need better graphics anyways. And so it becomes cheaper.
Well, I was going to push you back a little bit when you talked about when you talk about latency. I don't disagree with you that latency can occur if you're too far from a server. But the other thing to think about is you're talking about, you sound like, I'm being presumption here, that you sound like a first-person shooter gamer, which is
all
what I am.
All types of shooters, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only kind of game I want to play, but that's my preference. But there is multiple other categories of gamers who don't require that level of performance.
And I agree. And I think there's a place where streaming can become a crazy low cost option for widening how many people were never going to buy a console anyways.
Well, these are console type games, but I'm just saying that people who aren't at the bleeding edge of games, right? And by the way, those games are getting more and more infrequent because they're so damn expensive to build. So anyway, that category, which we call the casual gamer, and which is the biggest market also, by the way, I think those folks are going to be very well served by the cloud.
Oh, no, I entirely do agree with that. But I guess I just don't know that. I think we'll always. Okay. I don't think anything is always. I'll say that. Never say always, never say never. Right. But, let me bring a reader.
Never say should.
Yeah. But I'll reader mail question here. Deus Nightfire says, how has console gaming revolutionized the GPU industry as a whole? It's a pretty open-ended question, but I'm curious how you'd answer it.
Well, I don't know that it has, actually. Back in the PS4 and 3, the GPU was not the GPUs that we know and love today, and so they were kind of a special case. But I think the GPU technology has moved independently of the console. The game demand, which is what will drive what a GPU does or doesn't do, is now coming from the PC. It used to be that the game developers would develop for a console first and then port to the PC thanks to AMD's success in building consoles, that's changed. And now the games pretty much come out at the same time, unless they're an exclusive title for a console. But I don't think that the console has driven the GPU other than to try and get some of the cost out of it, which AMD has done a good job of with the integrated graphics. So it's a tough question. I'd have to think about how you would measure that. I don't know. The short answer is I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, when I look at that question, the real thing that I like to think of is I think sometimes console generations force devs to stop just doing brute force. Like the PS360 generation forced them, like, finally, most people back then still gamed on highly clocked dual cores. They're like, nope, now you got 6 threads or more, use them. And then like the PS4 and Xbox One brought 7 or 8 threads, depending on which console you're talking about. And those threads were clocked really low. So it's like, you guys can't depend on this single 5 gigahertz core anymore. You got to make sure you actually use all of the cores. And now we're going to make fast SSDs. I think Microsoft said openly, like, hey, Microsoft Studio games meant to come out on Xbox Series X and PC at the same time. If you don't have an SSD, it's not going to boot anymore, right? Like, making devs actually move forward with new technology instead of just brute force. I don't know. I think sometimes it forces out some of that. I don't want to call it laziness, but it forces them to actually make use of like a new standard that's not the bare minimum.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And the SSD, by the way, is a big deal in this next generation of consoles, both Sony and Microsoft's. The games are going to be blazingly fast. You're going to be you're going to be blown away by how fast they load and how fast they run when they're changing maps and things. You're not going to have these stupid little graphics that they put up to distract you while they're swapping out maps.
Yeah.
It's just going to go bang and be there.
The thing of like crawling under a wall between areas and like it's very comical. Like, I think, like, if I have kids, like, they'll look back at old games and be like, why every 20 minutes do I have to climb a ladder or go down a fire pole or something?
Or watch
they're loading. Yeah.
Or I have to watch this video of somebody doing something. I'm just sitting here watching it.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Like, so many cutscenes. I mean, look, cutscenes have a place, but there are so many cutscenes that they just put there because they need to occupy your eyes while they load the next area.
Right. Yeah, so it's while the machine catches its breath. Well, that's going to change, and that was primarily due to loading time, and the loading times now are going to be an order of magnitude or more faster.
Yeah, and another thing I heard is that, like, when you install a game in the past, they had to plan for maybe they're still using hard drives. And I mean, a hard drive is physically moving a little arm around and looking at parts of the disk. So they would literally have to install the same texture file maybe 100 times so that the arm wouldn't have to move much if you're loading one part of the game. And they're like, yeah, we just don't need to do that anymore. And in fact, the PlayStation 5 has 2 hosts, so it can do double. And then it also can burst to like absurd gigabytes per second. So there's talk of just like, well, loading. But I actually heard that they're finding it jarring with some past gen games on the PS5 because you respawn so quickly that it's like, imagine if you got shot and you were just already standing there again, and then you get shot and there's no break from the load screen. So that's the type of differences I'm hearing about.
Well, it's true. And a lead developer guy, I can't remember his title, but superstar guy at Sony said that there were a couple of games on the backward compatibility issue that they actually had to slow down the machine.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, so it worked. Just funny to think about.
Microsoft, I'll tell you a little anecdote. Microsoft had a similar problem. When they did a generational switch in the last generation Xbox, they shrunk the processor as a cost improvement to get the cost out of it, and in doing that, they got a faster processor.
Oh yeah.
And they had to detune that because Microsoft.
Yes, that happens with consoles all the time. I think it's the Xbox One Slim, like they shrunk it to 16 nanometer, and they had some problems because the clock speed. I mean, you're just getting it faster, right?
Yeah, but the thing is that the console producers have to give a guarantee to the game developers.
Yep.
One of the things about a console is we're giving you a stable platform that you can rely on for a minimum of 5 years. That thing's going to be rock solid. It's not going to. We're not talking about a PC here. It's going to change every 6 months. You got this platform. You can rely on it, and that's their guarantee. But sometimes it has funny consequences.
Oh yeah, it certainly does. The clock speed thing with node shrinks, I've heard actually multiple times.
Currently, I am in the process of breaking down my mining rigs. It's just not profitable anymore, and I want to use some of the spare parts, plus a few new ones, to build my first benchmarking station. Now, what most people might not be able to guess is that my mining rigs all used Windows, and ones with legitimate keys. But getting those legitimate keys was a hassle. I was forced to scour eBay and be discerning in making sure that the people selling those $10 Windows keys weren't a scam. And sometimes the keys didn't work and I had to fight for my money back. But you don't have to if you go to CDK Offers. Go to cdkoffers.com and use the promotional code BrokenSilicon to get 25% off an already cheap list price of Windows 10 Professional. Then all you do is click on your email account, go to User Center, and then My Purchase Orders to get the code. Just use this code with a normal download of Windows 10 Professional from Microsoft's website. All right, links in the description.
So let's switch gears here. Brad Medlin writes in and he says, do you ever expect multi-GPU to truly return to the gaming environment? Based on recent advance with NVLink, some highly utilized workstation software is leveraging the high bandwidth bridge share resources almost as if it were one GPU. I'm just curious if the gaming market will develop to be able to at least share the resources like VRAM anytime soon.
It's a question that takes you into a deep dive. If you're thinking about multiple GPUs in the terms of Crossfire or SLI,
right? That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that's not coming back because the payoff for it just wasn't there. The doubling of the processor did not give you doubling of performance, not even close. So it just wasn't cost effective. But the actual GPU construction itself has evolved to this concept known as chiclets, and they are multiple GPUs, but they are multiple GPUs that are talking internally to each other very, very quickly.
Something Intel's working on with their Z.
That's right. So an internal fabric is doing it, not going through the PCI bus or a special bus over the top, as we did for SLI and Crossfire. So the answer is complicated, but it's yes, multiple GPUs are coming back. They're already back, but no, they're not coming back in the form of Crossfire and SLI.
Yeah, I don't really see that happening either. There was a point where I had 6950 Crossfire, and there were plenty of games where it did work for a while. But what you learn is some of them had frame time issues, but you didn't notice because you were getting 300 frames per second anyways. And also, it was taking an immense amount of programming effort at AMD and Nvidia to make those things actually work. They were having to basically fix it for every single game. And it sounds like it just wasn't sustainable. Yes, they were able to make a big push. And I know there was this golden age of dual GPU setups that actually, and look, I would be clear, they worked. Mine worked. But there is no way they could have kept up with that and kept doing refreshes. I don't really see that either. I do think, of course, that we'll get something similar to Zen with graphics cards, and it'll allow us to scale performance more than we otherwise could.
Yeah, another anecdote is about 4 or maybe 5 years ago, I can't remember exactly now, AMD brought out a new mid-range GPU, and I forget the exact number of it, but it was fair to medium in its performance, and NVIDIA had a high-end board that was just killer. And so AMD's marketing push for a little while was, hey, look, you can buy 2 of our boards for less than 1 of theirs and theoretically get the...
Are you thinking of the RX 480? Because I thought that was ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, the bottom line was no one did it.
It wasn't that great. It didn't really work that well. I mean, it was already over by then. That was pretty desperate, in my opinion. I remember them showing you can do, 3 RX 480s and be, 30% better than a 1080. And I'm like, 3? It takes 3 for you to beat one of NVIDIA's cards while using double the energy? Over double the energy?
More than double. That was the other thing, is that AMD has not been as power efficient as Nvidia has. And so 3 AMD cards to 1 Nvidia card, you need to look at your power bill.
Well, and then think of how expensive your motherboard and would have to be to support. It'd be cheaper for you to just, frankly, it would probably be cheaper overall to just get an Nvidia Titan, even though that's not really about price performance. But so let me switch gears again here. What do you think about AMD's ability to take market share from Intel over the next 2 years?
On the CPU side?
Yes.
They're doing it. So what I think about is they're doing it. Now, they're doing it for 2 reasons. And the big question is, which reason is going to be the sustaining reason? Reason number 1 is that they have a damn good part. The Zen processor is really a really good part, and the Threadripper is also. But the other reason is that Intel, as you are well aware, I'm sure, has had some production problems.
Yeah.
And there have been people who've been, wanting to buy processors, couldn't get them from Intel, so went to AMD, and when they got there, found out, hey, this is a damn good processor. How come we didn't try this before? So AMD is winning hearts and wallets and getting an opportunity to show what they can do in the processor. Now, the other area you have to think about is that the CPU processor market is basically 3 primary platforms. Could be a 4th one if you want to think about it. But the 3 primary platforms are desktop, notebook, and data center. And the 4th one is a subset of data center, which is known as GPU compute, which includes all the AI training stuff. AMD is making great inroads in the data center. They're also making great inroads in the laptop area, and they've got a whole bunch of new laptop wins. So they're positioned to show well on market share in the CPU space. And the thing about CPUs is that OEMs like HP, Lenovo, and Dell, and so forth, when they make a commitment to a processor, they don't do it willy-nilly. They don't flip-flop every other time. When they make a commitment, that's a long-term commitment, and you really have to do something bad or piss them off to get thrown out.
Well, I'm hearing there are a lot of people who are pretty pissed off at Intel right now. And that's something a server contact told me, is that that they're thinking of switching to Epic way sooner than they thought they would. And I mean, look, he's like, hey, we were on Intel for, 15, 20 years to get us to switch it back to AMD. What he wanted to tell me is, it's like, well, look, it's also going to be just as hard to get Intel to make us switch back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a tremendous investment to commit to a processor.
Yeah.
I mean, the supply chain, the testing that goes into it, the warranty repairs, the spares that they have to. I mean, and especially if you're selling product like HP and Dell do, for example, they sell a lot of product to the U.S. government and big corporations. Those guys just don't make fast decisions. And when they make a decision, it's good for 10 years. So if AMD breaks into those markets, and they are, they've got a good long run ahead of them.
Yeah. I guess in terms of markets though, how do you see them, like which one do you think is the hardest for them to take when it comes to, there's desktop, there's the there's the HEDT market, which I'm told they've basically taken actually with Threadripper. And then there's laptop and server. Like, I think it's easy to say, right? Server is tremendously hard to take any percentage point of market share because of how entrenched it is and all the things we just discussed. But how hard do you think it will be for AMD to take, I don't know what they're at now. I think they're at 18% market share in laptop. Like, how hard do you think it will be for them to get to like 30 or 40%?
No, that's a big jump. That's hard.
I know.
I mean, they're going to have to do a lot of things really, really right. And Intel is a $70 billion company.
Yes.
Right. You don't just brush them away. Right. You just, it's not like Intel's going to go, oh shit, game's over. AMD showed up. Well, pack up your bags, boys. Time to go home. They're not going to do that. But they've got resources that you can't imagine. And those resources, by the way, include deep relationships into their customers. Intel has probably the best forecasting system in the world because they can look through the lenses of their customers and really see what's coming up. And that gives them an insight as to what they should be building.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something I try to convey too. Is it's like, at least the way I think about it is, I mean, Renoir from AMD looks insanely impressive, and that should get them some market share. But so much of it is just down to the logistics, and I think people really underestimate how cheap it is for Intel to, spit out these 14 nanometer chips right now. That what they're selling in the do-it-yourself market is with absurd margins compared to what they could charge if they really got aggressive.
Well, the other thing that Intel has done in the last 6 months, maybe a year, is that they have exploded the SKUs. They came out with a design, and then that design plus the previous generation, they then spread out, and this is no exaggeration, to like 75 different products. So you can find whatever your need is, you're going to find an individual Intel part for that need. Well, just being able to support that type of a catalog, that alone is an enormous resource sink. AMD just doesn't have the resources to do something like that. So they have to take a part and make it bridge 5 or 6 Intel SKUs.
Well, it's like when people ask, well, Zen 2's out. Why don't they have Zen 2 all blah, 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 blah? Why don't they have this product and this product and this product? And why are they only launching Renoir now with 8 cores, whereas their 12-core one? And why don't they have this? It's like each one of these product launches takes an enormous amount of resources, just everything about it, not just designing it, manufacturing it, make sure your supply chain's ready for each tier of that product type. I don't think people understand, like, that's also why you see Radeon rebrand itself so many of its cards over and over, is because they can't afford to do that many product launches. Well, at least they didn't used to be able to. I think they're trying to now, though.
No, AMD is doing great. Their margins are up, which means they have more money to play with than they used to. I give Lisa Su an enormous amount of credit. She has made some great decisions, and she's making her investments, I think, in the right place. I think, AMD is probably in the best spot it has been in maybe 25, 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, let's see how this year pans out, and I think they could be better than they've ever been. There was a while where people were comparing, the Zen processors and this resurgence we're seeing now to like the Athlon days. And I'm like, I think it's pretty clear this is a bigger deal than the Athlon day, guys. I mean, the Athlon days were pretty brief if you think about it. And there wasn't as much of a long-term there. I think, I don't, but so here, let me switch gears again. So Steak and Chicken Man writes in and he says, what are your thoughts on I know I like his name too, on the AMD Global Foundry wafer supply agreement post-Zen? If I recall correctly, Global Foundry is supplying chips well into 2023, 2024. And I find it hard to imagine 14, 12 nanometer chips still being sold then. Will AMD drop Global Foundry soon? What are your thoughts?
These are my thoughts, right? I have no inside information on this.
Right.
But AMD is positioned itself where it has to be at the latest, greatest node. And Global Foundries has declared that they are not going to chase that anymore. They're going to be a node behind or more. So the opportunity for Global Foundry with AMD is rapidly declining, subject to the agreement that AMD made with Global Foundries about 4 or 5 years ago to guarantee a certain amount of product would be bought from them. So I think they'll run that contract out if it hasn't already run out. And then once they do, I don't think there'll be any Global Foundries in any AMD anything.
Yeah, I mean, you never say never. There can be select products where Global Foundry is the right choice, but I'm tempted to agree. I think a lot of people keep thinking, they're tied to Global Foundries, and I'm like, I think it's pretty clear they're hitching their coattails to TSMC and even possibly Samsung moving forward. At least until, Global Foundries can prove that it can get up to the same nodes as they can. I mean,
it can't. It's already missed that train. I mean, the train's left the station for them because they had committed to doing 7 nanometer and then said they wouldn't. Well, 7 nanometer now is commercially available in large volume. For Global Foundry to get back in the race, so to speak, they've got to jump to 3 nanometers. And it takes almost 10 years to do that. So they're way behind the curve. But their argument is, but the place that we are is the highest volume. and that
I
takes you
guess.
outside of leading edge.
Do you think it's a good argument from them? Because here's something I want to throw out there is this idea of like, yeah, I understand that this is where the bulk of the, sales are. And I understand that as you make these ultra mature, and I actually think their 12 nanometer FDX process is really impressive. Like, I understand that there's a lot of products you can do with this, but you understand that as TSMC gets more contracts, and they will, because they're on the cutting edge, they'll get more money, and they can use that money to make more capacity. And then I think they can just, look, are you not going to spend 50% more for a wafer at TSMC if it gives you 50% more efficiency? Are you really not going to make that choice if you're at Intel or AMD or Nvidia? I think you are,
Yeah, but those are the leading hotshot companies. There's another 100 companies out there who don't need that.
True. Yeah, which I guess is what they're targeting now. So yeah, I guess you think that over time, Global Foundries is just less and less of a factor, right, for AMD
at the leading edge. Yeah, and AMD lives at the leading edge, so that's a marriage no longer made in heaven.
So speaking of leading edge, what do you think about the on-ramp for ray tracing in games? I mean, right now, if we're being honest, I think ray tracing is just another bolted on feature on top of rasterization. It's not this. I mean, ideally, ray tracing, you wouldn't have devs have to go around and pre-bake lighting all over in every room. You could just set a global illumination source and some light bulbs, and you don't need to bother anymore. You could just make your games and not have to waste time doing that. But that takes an immense amount of resources. And I don't know, when do you think we'll get fully ray traced games? Like, how far away do you think we are?
Not very far. And there are two benefits to it. You mentioned one of them. The one benefit is that it significantly reduces the programming load for art.
Mm-hmm.
But the other benefit, and this is difficult to talk about because it's subjective. You may or may not know I've written a book about this, about ray tracing, and one of the aspects of it is that you feel it as much as you see it, and it's hard to describe in analytical terms, but it's like sound. If you've ever had an experience of, say, a really good Atmos sound system, you feel that much more than you hear it. So,
once you get used to it, it's hard to go back. I've got a decent sound system in my house, and I say, it makes a good, like really good speakers while you're playing a PC game. It makes a difference, guys.
It does, and think about it. We used to listen to AM radio, and then we listened to FM radio, and when we did, it was fine. We thought it was great, thought it sounded great, and so forth. But every time we moved up, got to the next level, and then had to go back, it was like, oh my God, we listened to that. Well, It's the same. It's the same way with ray tracing. Is that the effects of ray tracing in a properly crafted game, and that's a big caveat. I'll come back to it.
Sure.
Will give you a sense of reality, a sense of immersion that you can't put your finger on. It'll just kind of be there, but you won't be able to say why. And that's good, because if you're looking at it, then you're looking at the artifacts. If you're looking at it, you're not involved in it. It's like when you're watching a movie and you say, geez, that actress has a zit. Well, you've just left the story. You're looking at her zit. You're not following the story. So that's what will happen in games. Now, the problem has been, and this is what I mean about properly crafted, is that the first wave of games that came out with ray tracing capability were gimmicks.
Yeah.
And they were artificial in what they did.
Like in Battlefield 5, having the guns reflect a bunch of light off of them. I'm like, most of these guns aren't like made out of chrome, guys. Most of these guns don't reflect light.
Well, that's one of my pet peeves also, Battlefield 5, is that like they made a big deal about, look at the reflections on this car.
Yeah.
Well, who the hell at the end of World War II had a clean car? Right?
Yeah.
Or clean windows, right? And the other thing was like the windows in Amsterdam, right? There is not a window in Amsterdam that is a smooth, flat piece of glass. Yet in the game, they're all mirrors, right? I go, no, this is stupid. So that's just nonsense. That's poorly crafted. But Every new technology was like that. The first wave of VR was like that. The first wave of stereo vision was like that. It's just that, we have to learn how to use these tools. And the artists will, the most unsung heroes in the gaming industry are the artists. They're the ones that really make a game, I think. And they're going to learn how to do this because it's going to enhance their art. And I'm telling you, that you're going to go and play a game and you're just going to love it and you won't know why.
Yeah. And well, let me say this. So Fatboy Diesel writes in and he says, do you think developers will utilize multi-GPU to improve RT performance at any time? I know this is another multi-GPU question. And if not, how do you think they're going to embrace it? Is it just going because you say it's soon, but I'm told that it needs, 1,000 times more performance to get to fully ray traced worlds, which I think is misleading. That's like with current architectures. I'm assuming if we built them in a different way, they could probably do it way better. But do you see it ever involving multi GPU for like a ray tracing card, or how do you think we're going to get to that level of performance so soon?
Well, back in probably around 2010, I think, there were some interesting experiments run where 2 GPUs were in fact used, and one GPU was used almost as a geometry processor, and the other one was used just for ray tracing. Mm-hmm. And that worked reasonably well, but the problem was building the game that could do the load switching, the load balancing between the geometry and the rendering became such a horrendous pain in the ass, plus the fact you had the cost of 2 GPUs, that just wasn't considered viable, but it looked good. And one such example of it was Intel did this even further back in like 2005, I think it was. They put 16 processors in a box to do ray tracing real time, and they did ray tracing real time, but it took 16 processors. So the notion of using multiple processors to make ray tracing go faster, because ray tracing scales beautifully across processors, so you can do that, but it expense-wise is not good. Now, the flip side of that is every day almost somebody comes out with a tweak or a new algorithmic approach to ray tracing to make it more and more efficient.
Like there's this company, AdShare, that seems to be able to get it work on smartphones now in a way that's almost as impressive as on PC.
That's right, and I was going to call them out as an example. There's another little company that probably no one or very few people have heard about called Silicon Arts out of Korea. And just to get a little nerdy here for a moment, a GPU. Please. A GPU is constructed with what's called SIMD, which means similar instruction, multiple data. And so the idea there is you take the similar instruction is, okay, I want to do a function, and I want to throw a ton of goddamn data at it, so I'm going to do that function a gazillion times. And it's very, very efficient, and it's a beautiful thing for geometry. The problem is they break easily. And by what I mean is that if you change that instruction, you have to do a whole bunch of loading and reloading and unloading and so forth, and that disrupts your data flow, and so you get stutter and jitter and what have you. Ray tracing is particularly sensitive to that. And if you've noticed, whenever you've looked at a ray trace picture, if you move the camera view, it goes to snow and then it rebuilds itself back, right? So that's the disruptive thing. Well, the way you get around that is you build what's called a MIMD, multiple instruction, multiple data. That's a much, much harder machine to build because that looks like a telephone network. Well, this company, Silicon Arts, has done that. They have built a ray tracing engine, and in order to feed that engine, they put a MIMD processor underneath it, and they made a ray tracing GPU. Now, that's a system that, I don't know if they're going to find any customers for it or not. I hope they do. But it's a new approach to things, and it's incredibly powerful, incredibly fast, and it is one of these problem solvers. Now, I fully expect to see Nvidia and AMD mimic that in some sense. They know how to do this. It's not that it's a technological bewilderment to them. They certainly know how to do it. It's a matter of doing it cost effectively, and that's always the trade-off that we have.
Yeah. I got to say, I remember AdShare going in these interviews that they were going to be in a major console soon. And I remember hearing hints that Sony was considering adding some extra ray tracing chip. I was actually quite disappointed. Neither of the consoles had a extra ray tracing chip to accelerate it. I don't know that they're actually going to do ray tracing as well as they say they will. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but like you're saying, I think it's going to take an architecture that's entirely new to like fully ray trace. But that's probably like 5 years out, isn't it?
Yeah, probably. I mean, this stuff never stops evolving. Right. So, I mean, ray tracing is certainly not a new thing. I've been talking about it since, for 30 more years. So it'll be, I think, more evolutionary than revolutionary. And even if there is a revolution, and just to back off a second, Azure is a total software solution, whereas this other company, Silicon Arts, is a total hardware solution. In my fantasy world, I see those two things somehow or other coming together, and getting the best of both worlds, getting real synergy where 2 + 2 = 4, 5.
Well, yeah, that's what I was hoping for. Is they would take these algorithms and the expertise Azure has, and somehow bake it into the silicon directly, which they say they're working with AMD. And if they're not, and I would assume that Sony and Microsoft would have announced their partnership with working with Azure. So I guess that leaves Nintendo, and there's supposedly an AMD Nintendo product coming out.
Yeah, but there's another factor you need to think about, Tom, and that is that Sony and Microsoft don't want to tell you everything. They want to.
So you think they still could be using them?
I think they could be using them, and I think that you might never find out, because that's going to be their secret sauce, right? That's going to be the thing that allows them to differentiate their games. And so when you see an exclusive title come out of Sony or out of Microsoft, and it's just doing something amazing, you say, how the hell do they do that?
They'll just say, "Oh, it's our consoles." So
or just exactly.
Yeah, I guess that's something to watch then, huh? Because they've been very vague about their ray tracing performance, but they're both talking about it, and I'm like, I don't know, I don't see it on a hardware level where that's going to come from. So, yeah, I guess that's something to watch. I guess that kind of gets me to a last subject here, or one of the last ones. I don't know how much time you have, but VR. You've definitely written a lot about VR. I think you likened it to splitting the atom in terms of fundamental shifts. Am I wrong? Did I read that correctly?
That's good. I like it. Yeah, you're impressing me.
Yeah, I do my research before I interview guests. Where do you see VR going in the next decade, assuming we all live through this decade?
Yeah. Well, VR's got some fantastic features to it, some fantastic virtues to it. It's definitely got a home in the scientific and industrial sector. Are you familiar with a thing called a cave?
I'm aware of these holes in the grounds that you can walk through and live in them.
Well, visualize a room, a nice size room, right? And the walls are all rear projectors, so that you're in a room that is basically a giant video screen. All four walls, right? And maybe the floor and ceiling as well.
Sure.
And these types of rooms are called caves. And the idea is that you can go into them. It's almost like the holodeck. Think about it like that.
Well, and I've seen them in the movies, right? Like, I don't know, like I'm sure they've been in multiple Black Mirrors, and there was definitely that in Cloud Atlas and Minority Report.
Yeah, so the idea is you go into these things, these rooms, and when I say you, we're talking about engineers and scientists now, and you basically walk into a car, or you walk into an atom, a molecule of some type, and you look around and try and figure out what are the connections and where are the joints and where are the opportunities and does this work and so forth and so on. These rooms, as you can well imagine, are very expensive. Well, a VR headset replaces that room. And now you can do the same thing that you would do in maybe
that's something Microsoft's shown off. Yeah.
So from the scientific and industrial side, VR has a long runway. They've got a lot of space to go, and there's a lot of demand for it. But it's small numbers. You're talking about hundreds of thousands max, not millions. The consumer side, the benefits are there, and the people who can tolerate VR love it to death. The two problems are people don't really like having something hanging on their face for extended periods of time. In my travels around various conferences and giving lectures and so forth, and I'd be standing in front of an audience talking about it, and I'd say, okay, show of hands, everybody here who's tried VR, raise your hand, and I'd get maybe 20%, sometimes 30, and it would go up over time, as you can imagine, right? So then I say, okay, now keep your hands up if you've worn a headset for more than 5 minutes, and boom, 50% of the hands would disappear. 5 minutes, right? And so people have tried it and said, yeah, it's really interesting, but, and then the buts is a long list. It makes me sick. I get disoriented. I don't like this thing on my face. I can't focus, blah, blah, blah. And they're all physiological problems, by the way. And so those problems are being whittled away a bit at a time. I'm sure you've heard about Fovio rendering. And yes, no?
No.
Okay, well, you actually have. You're just not remembering properly. But it's basically the idea where we take the pixels that we can get and put them right in front of the center of your eye and then fade out towards the edges, which is how your eye normally sees anyway. And that cuts down on the bandwidth quite a bit and gives you a really good center picture. And that's kind of what Nvidia is doing with their...
Yes, I've heard of them working on that, yeah.
All right, so that was a pretty good breakthrough, but it was one of those things like every time you get an advantage and you get a disadvantage. Well, the disadvantage was for it to work, the headset had to see your eyes. Where are you looking?
Oh.
Well, guess what?
Of course, yeah.
Guess what? Eyes are like fingerprints. Nobody has the same type. They're different sizes. They're different distances. They're not particularly perfectly aligned. And so an eye tracker is a tricky thing to build. And also remember, you want to do this for a couple $100, right? So you have all these little niggly issues going on. And that's what's keeping VR from really taking off. But the biggest one, I think, is people just don't want to have this thing hanging on their head for an extended period of time.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely a problem. I know it's to the point where I think it's called the Oculus Quest, is it just has a processor in the VR unit. And so, you're only playing games that look last gen, but people are liking it way more because they're like, I will make my graphics look horrible if it means I don't have to have a freaking cord hanging off of my head.
Yeah, it's the Oculus Go, actually.
Oh, Oculus Go, okay.
Yeah, and that's got a Qualcomm processor in it. And you're right, it is last-gen games because I have one sitting next to me, actually, and I'm disappointed because I can't run the new Half-Life VR game on it because I love Half-Life.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I like Half-Life a lot, too. One thing I know about VR, though, that I'm told, at least, and there have been patents filed, is that it's not going to, of course, happen at the start of the console generation, because it's too expensive. They want to wait for the console to become a little cheaper and then make it as kind of a second wind rollout. It sounds like Sony's trying to make a PSVR 2 that is wireless using Wi-Fi 6 and just has a charging station. And I wonder if they can nail that could finally give you some kind of ubiquity, because so far it is still very niche, but I hope that can work. And I definitely agree. I think VR is here to stay. It's just going to be this slow climb out of being a niche product is how I see it. And I see a lot of people saying that it's like, do you think VR will come back? I'm like, VR hasn't left. I know plenty of people who are still buying VR devices. I just don't think it's going to be mainstream again, it's a slow climb up a mountain over 10 years, probably.
Well, it used to be that way with gamers. Like PC gamers were considered oddballs, right? Well, now we PC gamers that we used to be oddballs, now we're king of the hill because there's, 50 bazillion of us out there, and we're spending more money on games than people are spending on movies. Yeah.
Yeah, I always find that funny too. Like, there's such outdated terms when you hear them go like, "Are you a gamer?" That'd be like saying, "Do I listen to music?" Doesn't everyone listen to music? Like, what are you talking about?
I like that. I'm going to use that. Yeah, I breathe too.
Yeah, I know. And it's like, and look, there's some people, I do have like one friend who I'm not sure he listens to any music. And I'm like, well, there's people like that. I don't know what to tell you, but it's like, everyone plays some game these days. It'd be so weird, I think, to just miss out on it. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's a great form of entertainment, and given the stress that we're living in now with this virus and everything, being able to lose yourself in a game is a nice way to just get away from it for a while.
Yeah, Well, you know what? I think that just about does it. I've been through pretty much everything I had written down to talk to you about. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss or speak about going on now in the industry in the past that you think would be interesting?
Only I'll give you a couple of words of advice. I get queried by Quora frequently. Can you answer this question type thing? I don't know if you know about Quora or not, but
yeah.
Anyway, so two answers that I seem to have to give repeatedly, obviously no one reads the old stuff, is I get asked, when should I buy my new PC? And the answer is now. Don't wait, because if you wait, you will wait forever. There's always going to be a better one coming. You can't time it perfectly. You can be intelligent about it, but basically, if you've got the budget, go get it. And the secondary part of that is buy as much as you possibly can, because PCs and graphics boards in particular are real value for money. And I know that sounds like I'm being a commercial for my friends at Nvidia and AMD, but it's true.
You capitalist pig.
Yeah, guilty. But seriously, it really comes from a love of graphics, and the point is that graphics, the more you pay, the better you get, and it is an honest to God deal. I mean, there is no ripoff.
It's a lot better than it was 2 years ago. That's for sure.
Yeah, and a $500 board is genuinely twice as good as a $250 board. It really is. So my advice is, if you've got money, go out and shop now and get the best thing you can afford. In fact, if your budget's $500, spend $550.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think people are stuck in this. Maybe I should call it this. Maybe I should call it the Sandy Bridge mentality. I think there are these people that saw, well, if you bought a 2,500K, whenever it was, I think in like 2010, and you got that and overclocked it, and then maybe, you got an R9 290X, you haven't needed to upgrade for, blah, 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 and you've just watched people waste money. And it's like, I agree there was stagnation after Sandy Bridge, and you really did just need the 2,500K for a pretty startling amount of time compared to normal, but that's not how things usually work. And even though Moore's Law has slowed down, we're moving on with chiplets now, and soon 3D stacking and all this other stuff. And so it's like, guys, I think you got to accept that there used to be this time period, most of computer history, where if you just waited 2 years, it was always better. And so just upgrade when you need to. And if you need to, because it's like with this whole Zen mentality, they're like, well, wait a second. You're telling me you think Zen 3 is going to be, 50% better or this much better? And I'm like, well, so should I wait for Zen 3? And I'm like, unless you want to wait for Zen 4. What are you waiting for? I think we're done, right?
That's right.
We're done with the stagnation. Intel has competition again, and I think Radeon's bringing competition. Maybe you want to wait till RDNA 2 comes out, but I got to say, the stuff that's out now isn't that bad. You can get an RX 5700 for $300, and I think it comes with a couple of the latest games. And SSDs are like, they're pretty cheap now compared to where they used to be, guys. Yeah. I don't know. I think we're out of the stagnation. Yeah. So I mostly agree with that. The only thing I'll say is I have people ask the question this way. They'll go, I'm happy with my whatever, right? Maybe they have a Vega 64 and a 2700X 8-core processor, and they're like, and it runs all my games maxed out. Should I upgrade now? And I'm like, well, if you don't need to, I'm not sure why you're asking me. If you want an excuse to buy something, you'll be able to find it. So that's the only thing I would say. It's the caveat I always give, is it's like, if there's no need, then I don't know why you're upgrading now. But if your games aren't running above 60, if you actually are having trouble running them, if you wait for Zen 3, it's like, I don't know, you're in Zen 4 is going to be pretty impressive. Are you sure you want to wait for Zen 4 now?
Well, I agree with all that. And the only other thing I would add to it is upgrade your monitor.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I think monitors have stagnated pretty hard in recent
totally
memory.
Disagree. I should put my camera on so you can see my rig. So my gaming rig is a 49-inch monitor.
I think you sent me a picture of it.
I did, yeah. And that's my gaming rig, right? And I tell you, I can get the equivalent of VR sickness with that. because I put my face almost on the screen sometimes, and it fills my periphery up so much that if I don't pull back a little bit and slow down, I can start to feel it. So I think monitors, the new super high res monitors with HDR, fabulous experience.
Well,
and they're
I would
not
say
that
don't
expensive.
overlook it, right? Don't get a 2080 Ti if you're gaming 1080p 60 from a TN panel from 6 years ago. So I agree with that sentiment, and they are starting to come down in price a little bit again. The only thing I will say is I really think these other things like micro LED and OLED and those types, like I have an OLED 120 hertz HDR screen, and it is it's a lot better than a TN panel. That's the one thing absolutely. I'll say is, and once those come to the monitor market, that's going to bring a whole new level of HDR low latency gaming. That's the one thing I'm saying is I think monitors are going to get a lot cheaper at the end of this year.
They will. And that's the other thing I was telling you about, the emotional aspect of ray tracing. Another emotional aspect is HDR. Is that, again, you can't actually put your finger on it, but it
has to be good HDR. There's a lot of fake HDR out there.
Well, the content has to be there for it, but when it's right, it's magic.
Yeah, I play the game Sekiro, and I play it on my HDR OLED TV, and the fire, it looks absolutely insane. Like it's actually laughable how good the fire in like a burning city in this like samurai game looks compared to like my older panels. Like it looks, and that's something too, is it's worth pointing out that like this better looking monitor affects the graphics much more than a 20% stronger graphics card ever could.
You're talking about generational change. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So just make sure, again, if you're haggling over, should I spend $400 on this graphics card that's, this percent better, is it's like a better monitor, it could make a far, far, far greater leap in how good you perceive the graphics to be. Yeah, I think we did it. I think it's done. I think that was a success. I'll say, thanks for coming on so much. I really enjoyed this quite a bit, and I think everyone else will too. I'll put a link to who you are in the description and stuff. I guess I'll let you plug yourself one more time. Who are you? Where can people find you?
I'm easy to find. It's Jon, Jon Peddie, Peddie. You type that into Google, it'll find me. And it's Jon Peddie Research. And visit our pages. We have two pages, Jon Peddie Research, and also a thing called GFX Speak, Graphic Speak. And on both of those pages, you'll find lots of free stuff, lots of free information. We have subscriber pages also, but we put up a lot of stuff free, including all of our testing that we do. That's all available for anybody to look at. Okay.
Well, thanks for coming on. Enjoy the pandemic. Hopefully we'll speak again soon. And have a good evening.
All right, you too. Bye now.
All right, bye.
The following podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother, Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, and select technical editing by Carbon Cry. You can find all of our information, including how to get a hold of us, at www.mooreslawsdead.com. And if you are a fan and would like to send mail or other hardware, please mail parcels to Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 10468, Peoria, Illinois 61612. And speaking of fans, without exaggeration, the patrons are solely responsible for the continued distribution of the content you just listened to. And so if you have some extra money, but only if you do, please consider supporting us. For just $2 a month, you get access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to have your questions read aloud on Broken Silicon, Die Shrink, and Loose Ends, and of course, the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who would love to meet you. I am one of them. The Discord is only at $1, and at higher tiers, you get access to ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the back catalog of Flyover States podcast, thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts, and other perks as well. And if you cannot afford to support us, please just share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family on social media and Reddit. And give Broken Silicon and Flyover States a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. All of this really does help so much more than I think anyone realizes. If you'd like to advertise on the podcast or a person of interest who would like to be a guest, please reach out to the email address mlhbdead@gmail.com. But as I said, this podcast would not be possible without its fans supporting it. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher producer levels.
Bootman, Carbon Cry, Dean, Benny Berlin, Justin Yant, Thomas Rupp, I Love You, Lynn and Jim, Bollocks, Jordan Betcher, Muhammad Al-Kawari, Frederick Lau, Primetech TV, Justin Parrish, Zachary Martin, Terrence Herod, Carl Marco, Phil S., Thyrister, The Ninth Dude, Greg Renegar, John Bible, Chrysantine, Night Rogue 77, The Mechanical Philosopher, Lebo Kinkilo, Fatboy Diesel, Derek Evans, Matthew McMullen, Christoph Novak, Neil X01, Matt Salem, Aaron Close, Sexy, Scott Shope, Sadler, Richter Cohagen, Alethros, Telos, Caden Picknell, Greg T. Wanchuk, Jacob Barber, Exoti, Whiny Care Bear, Matthew Lane, Paul Jones, Jan Ronner, Rubber Ducks, Michael Costa, Ali Robertson, Gordon Lamb, Jonathan, Drita Full, Evan Dingle, Nick Neasy, Dominic Dewart, Harold P. Bureau, Wayne, Sam MacArthur, James Crosta, Hector Santana, Brad Medlin, Andrew S., and Edward Huff. And of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.